Hello, this is Stephen Coates, and this is the Bureau of Lost Culture, broadcasting from Soho in London. And as we've said many times on this show, if you'd been here 40, 50 years ago, these streets would have seemed very different. And if you'd been out at night, you might have seen a young man, a young dude, flitting from club to club, from gig to gig, lending his signature organ sound to many other musicians, and over the years collaborating with many, many of them too. Sonny Boy Williams, Rod Stewart, Jimi Page, Billy Cobham, Spencer Davies, Long John Baldry, Tony Williams, Jimi Hendrix, John McLaughlin, Eric Burdon, and many others. And of course with Julie Driscoll, with whom he covered a Dylan song, This Wheel's on Fire, in the 60s, which became a huge hit. After those heady years, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and still to this day, he formed his own Oblivion Express, recording and touring, with some of his family playing too. And family is a big part of this story. He was born, as I said, in West London, and narrowly avoided being killed in the bombing, spending time out of the city in Yorkshire as one of the many children who were evacuated. His story is quite extraordinary. He's quite extraordinary. He remains very modest, very family orientated, and he's great fun. He's Brian Auger. And we're recording this programme because there's a brilliant new archival series, Auger Incorporated, released by Soul Bank Music and IK7. It's a stunning collection of his amazing work over the decades. So I was very privileged, lucky I think, as I often am on this show, to spend time with him. It's a privilege and a pleasure to spend time with you. Thanks for lending us your ears for these hours. Check everything out that we do at bureauoflostculture.com. Thanks to everybody who keeps adding their contributions to our survey about what it is that you guys dig and where you're at. It's amazing. I've just had so many brilliant suggestions for the show and films and books to read. If you haven't filled it in, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, and you can join us too and find out about everything else that we're up to. All right, well listen, let's leave Soho behind and head out to Venice Beach to meet the man, Brian Auger. Hello, Brian.
Thank you so much, man.
For an 82-year-old, you're looking extraordinary. What's the secret?
Take it day by day and we deal with whatever comes up. You know, if you're an artist and you're pushing ahead, it really is like a growth of your own spirit. I'm just kind of getting to the understanding of what it's all about. I mean, I have had those nights where I looked at the keys and went, you know what, this is impossible. And then the groove starts out and I go, wait a minute, this is going to be cool. The time vanishes, you know, or stops. A lot of the music comes in my quiet times, kind of like a meditation, in fact. But I think that there's an imprint of the universe inside each of us. To tap into that releases what it is, and so that's when I hear a lot of my music.
You've never stopped moving forward. You've never stopped playing. You've never stopped moving on, and you know the spirit moves you or moves in you. And you know, right the way back, how young that spirit first came into you. And well, you were born in Shepherd's Bush, right? You're a proper Londoner. Tell us a little bit about that. What was your family home like? And, you know, what was London like? Because we're talking about the war, the Second World War, right? Came into the world during that conflict.
Right at the beginning in 1939, we went through the Blitz. It was really funny. My parents never showed any fear or anything. They just warned me. My mum would sit me down at that age, probably about 3. Tell me what your name is. Right, you know, where you live. And that was drilled into me, just in case, I think, you know.
In case you were separated from them or...
Yes, getting bombed the hell out of, actually, every night. But we had a shelter in the backyard with a big, thick slab of concrete on top of it. And we would go in there and draw the blackout curtains, you know, and sit there with some tea. Or...
And your dad pulled people out of the rubble.
That's right. He'd been... wounded in the First World War, and so he knew the ropes. Fighter did come down in our row of terrace houses probably, fortunately for us, a couple of 100 yards down the road. He did say that they dug out 3 people and saved this lady who was down there. And that was it. It was like crazy. At one point, I was with my father and we were walking up Latimer Road, and all of a sudden, a German bomber appeared with an English fighter kind of like strafing him. And my dad grabbed me and said, listen, when you see stuff like that, he says, get in the doorway. It didn't instill a kind of fear in me. The reason was because just across the road where we were, there was the coal man that delivered these 28 pound sacks of coal. And there was a big plow horse, drawing this thing between the shafts. And it was stationary. And when this damn thing came over, the horse reared up. All of a sudden, all the coal fell off in the road. Like that.
Inside, in the relative moments of peace in the house, was it a musical family? What was the context of your sort of, developing?
Yes, it was, because my mum and dad liked music from the shows. My eldest brother, God bless him, had a collection of American jazz. My sisters were in love with American crooners, of course, Frank Sinatra and Bing. There was all that going on. We had a piano. It was called a pianola because it had a little kind of like cubby hole in front. And you could put a roll of this paper with the slots in that was drawn across a grid. In the grid was punched a hole for every note on the piano. And so what happened was you pedaled, lo and behold, the piano played.
Play a piano.
Yes, exactly.
You could play the piano if you couldn't play the piano, basically.
Yes. Some sisters of my brother showed me how to hook up the piano rolls. Then I'd stand on the pedals with my chin above the and pedal away like some demented cyclist. And all this music was available. We had all the operas and all sorts of concertos and God knows what. One day I was playing my favorite, which was the William Tell Overture. Ba-da-dum, 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 bum, bum. And something connected. I looked at the piano, and there were these octaves that repeated, but they were higher up. And so I thought to myself, well, if I copy the same notes that's playing down here, up here, maybe I can play along with it. And lo and behold, eureka. That was the start of really beginning to understand, the music.
I guess also you're getting the pleasure, were you, of actually, even though you might be only pumping the pedals, of other people's pleasure.
Yes, and I heard all these melodies over and over again, and I still kind of hark back to that.
You're also sort of seeing the structures in music, which of course later in terms of what you did in jazz was important, how the kind of building blocks of it, of harmony and melody and stuff work right. And this extraordinary thing happens, which is that the bombs get closer. Lots of kids were evacuated from London, weren't they, to the countryside?
They were safe. I went up to Batley, just under Leeds, and fortunately it was, I was given to a family that were very nice and kind, and the first thing I noticed was they had a piano. So it's funny how the universe kind of works these things, So I used to play from Glenn Miller. The people were like, "Oh, this is amazing, man!" And this is amazing. And we've got to call our friends over and go, "Hey, playing some piano,
How old were you?
Just after my 5th birthday. And we were bombed out, actually. There was one of those flying bombs, V1, because nobody knew where it was going to drop.
So your house was totally flattened. Everything was gone. And you're away during this time, right? So over 2 years. It's a big part of your life when you're 5, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember those 2 years in an unfriendly way or anything. I must have been, These people looked after us nicely. The piano there. And the thing was that when I was taken back when my dad came, picked us up and took us back to London, and we were in a different house. And I was like, that's what was strange, because the other one was gone. I recognized my dad because he'd come up a couple of times to visit us, but my mum had put on some weight and I wasn't sure whether it was her or not. So I was a bit discombobulated. And then I went into the front room and there was my piano.
They saved it from the wreckage?
Somehow or other, and it was unscathed.
Probably had some foresight that you're going to be touring Germany in the future. So your piano's there, but I'm guessing that by this time your playing had improved quite a lot. So were your parents a bit blown away when you came back and started playing for them again?
Yeah, I think so, because that was my entertainment. So I'd come home from school and I'd practice until I had to go to sleep. And sometimes, I suppose they had to suffer through my early practicing days, and I was finding some chords and, working a few things out at that time. It was the collection of jazz that my eldest brother, had that interested me, the swing of it. Great people, Satchmo and Kid Ory and A.C. Ellington, kind of the list goes on.
So even at the age of 7 or 8, you were already kind of getting grooved up by some of the greats, right?
Sure, yeah.
Can you remember, now looking back down the years, Brian, what it actually felt like when you actually heard those people for the first time? I mean, it obviously kind of set you on fire in some way, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I heard Oscar play, I was like, how could you have that kind of technique? And how could you do that kind of improvisation? And I was just besotted with this. So I went to my record store in Shepherd's Bush Market. There was a WG stores. The Who used to go there later on as well. And I said to these guys, look, I want this thing by Oscar Peterson. I said, no, we ain't got that, man. No. About a year later, they called me in when I was looking through the front window and said, hey, come in, So I come in and they showed me the 78 to Tenderly by Oscar Peterson. I said, wrap that up.
Because it's important to say you were completely self-taught, weren't you? No formal training. So you were teaching yourself by trying to play with those records or trying to find out what was going on with Peterson's style and stuff.
Yeah.
So you were touched by the spirit of it, as we said earlier, as well as the actual playing. And then how did you take it from the house to the street or to the club? What was that sort of bit of the journey like for you when you first started to perform outside the family, outside the house?
We used to have a bay window. And my mates would sit round the outside and we'd open the windows and I'd play these music rolls, and maybe dabble a little bit on, what the ones that I knew. But that was like playing to an audience, and then I got a scholarship to one of the grammar schools in London. And the first thing I noticed was when we went into assembly that there was this beautiful Bechstein piano in a mahogany case, a half-size piano, and some guy would step forward, one of the teachers, and I'd play "Oh, Thing Brian," we'd all sing, "Oh, yeah." So it was kind of ridiculous, and I coveted this piano, man. I looked at it I tried to figure out a way where I could get my hands on it. I waited behind one night when I was probably about 12, 13 years old. And I saw the piano standing there and I waited until everything had gone quiet. And I realized that everyone had gone home, And so I jumped on this piano and I started to play some Winifred Atwell stuff.
Well, ragtime.
Yeah. Anyway, I was like, they sounded incredible on this piano. And all of a sudden, around the corner comes the headmaster with the cap and gown. And he says, Auger, what the devil do you think you're doing? And I was like frozen. So, excuse me, sir. I had my eye on this piano. I think it's just wonderful, and I wanted to play it. So I waited till everybody went home, and I'm really sorry to disturb you. And he said, "What the devil was that you were playing?" I said, "Well, it's called Boogie Woogie, sir." He said, "Boogie Woogie?" he said, "Is it Tommy? Is it popular?" I said, "Very." Actually, this lady that wrote that, she's at the top of the hit parade at the moment. The hit parade. He says to me, "Well, have you ever done a Friday solo then?" So I said, "Well, no, I haven't, because I can't play anything in the kind of like classical way because I'm self-taught." Mm-hmm. And he said, "Oh, I see." I said, "Well, would you like to do a Friday solo?" I said, "Well, yes, sir." "All right, then, Friday morning then." I thought, oh my God, what? So there's the faculty sitting on the dais up there. They're all kind of men of empire. So he steps forward and he says, "This morning's Friday solo will be by Auger of 2A. And it's a composition by Miss Winifred Atwell called The Cross Hens Boogie." I'd steamed into the Cross Hands Boogie, and when I'd finished, there was like a stadium roar from the assembly, and I got to play the piano, which is fantastic.
Your first taste of the pleasure that an audience is going to get, right, as well.
There was 200 guys in an assembly, and when they got up and were raving, I thought, well, this is good. Maybe I could have a career. Wow. My mum and dad wanted me to be a chartered accountant, believe it or not. These were steps along the way. And when I look back, I kind of look at the influence of whatever it is that's up there swirling around.
Signposts on the road, right?
Absolutely. I used to play and practice, and all of a sudden things kind of, started to make sense. Got into a band with all these guys who were about 45 years old, and we were playing for dancing in a club. Mainly that, actually, and they said, "Right, do you read?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't really." "All right, we're going to give you the guitar part." And I started to see, G minor 7, C7, and A flat minor 7, D flat 7. Wait a minute, and it started to click. I mean, that's what they're doing. I began to understand what Charlie Parker was all about.
You left school when you were 16, right? Got a job, proper job. The road to being a chartered accountant.
I had to do this thing because I had a younger brother and a younger sister, and somebody had to pay the rent because my dad was kind of an invalid, really.
Playing in the evenings, playing in clubs.
Yeah, I used to play for different things. I went to see this cottage club, which was just off Cambridge Circus. Well, they're looking for a piano for a couple of nights, and a couple of nights turned into nearly 2 years. Right. They were open until 2 o'clock, and you could drink until 2 o'clock.
Right.
I had to leave at 1 to run for the train home. Start the next round of it all, but I so look forward to playing. And
so this is late 50s, right? The evolution of the teenager, in the 50s, and music coming in from America. You've got the skiffle thing going on. And what was it like? I mean, what was the sort of musical scene like?
You hit the nail on the head, man, when you said skiffle. Outside, what was happening was a new generation was really creeping up and obliterating the old image of the Brit with the bowler hat and striped trousers. Then the new kind of generation started to alter Britain, and also the music kind of went along with it. So
there was like an active club scene, was there?
Oh yeah, that club was amazing because you could drink till 2 o'clock. Everybody, all the best musicians in London would make a beeline for it. So they were all around, and also the American stars that came into London, ended up there. Billie Holiday came in one night with an entourage. The manager, Al, put a record on, one of her records on, with You've Changed, song You've Changed, which is a beautiful song. And she started to cry and say, no, no, please, take it off, I can't.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, a lot of guys played for Basie. Cat Anderson came in. That was my university shot.
Seeing these people from the bands that you were loving and listening to on vinyl must have been quite a buzz.
It was, and I mean, I would listen to these guys and go, oh my God, this can't be happening, you know. That was a big starting point for me.
There was a whole thing going on, wasn't there, in London at the time? I mean, you know, in the West End, in Soho, you know, with the clubs, with the musicians and the fashion. Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing, right, that, you know, you must have been pretty cool amongst your peers, right? Because you're playing in these clubs, you know, the kid from Shepherd's Bush, you know, is.
I don't think they knew, because I was playing, you know, from 9 o'clock in the evening until 1 o'clock, and then running for the last train home. And so, you know, it was a full day after day. But what it did was, A, looked after my family, and B, I was just learning all this stuff.
And then what happens? I mean, and we're still in the late 50s, moving into the early 60s, right? After playing you started playing at other clubs like the Flamingo. Tell us the story about how you moved really from kind of jazz into R&B more, and then also obviously from piano into organ.
I'd played piano at the Flamingo, and I'd play Ronnie Scott's, which was about 2 minutes walk from the Flamingo, and they were totally different, because in Ronnie's it was all very intellectual, and and then I'd go over to the Flamingo, and it would be raving, with people dancing, and you know, and the audience was, you know, it was young white kids, people from the islands who were part of the empire at the time, you know,
Caribbean people, American soldiers, right?
The American bases that were dotted around us. I used to have a great time doing that. The guy that ran it, Rick, he said to me, when are you going to buy an organ then? So I said, how dare you, I'm a jazz pianist. You know, he said, well, never mind that. He said, you'd be a natural. You know, so I said, no, I can't do that. And about a week later, he rang me up, and he said, Brian, you've got to help me. Georgia Fame, which was his main band, had gone down to Cornwall and laid on the beach. And believe it or not, there was a heat wave at the time in England. When he wakes up, he's terribly sunburned and has to be carted away to the hospital. And I hadn't realized, but when Rick Gunnell showed me the gigs, it was like 3 a day. I said, well, yeah, I could play stuff, because no problem. But when do you want me to start then? He says, well, tonight. I'd say, but I've got this gig accompanying an American singer called Babs Gonzalez, who was another nutcase. And I've got 2 45s for Ronnie. And he said, I'll get you to wherever you need to go. Just, you know, if you can, So I said, okay, all right, Rick. And I said, where do we start? He said, it's at the Roaring Twenties in Carnaby Street. So I went there, and at 7:30, just to make sure that I got plenty of time, thank God. And the guys were setting all the gear up and everything, you know. I said, where's the piano? said, "Oh no, Bri, there ain't no piano in this club." I said, "You're kidding, right?" He said, "No, but it's George's organ up there, you know. You can play that."
You'd never played an organ at this stage, right?
No.
This is
And
nuts.
so, well, I think one of those moments that the universe comes in and goes,
Right.
bang, feel that, you know. So I was really like ready to run away, and I thought, no, I've got to do this somehow or other. So I went up to the organ, and it was an M3 Hammond with all these switches and dials on it. And I looked at that lot and went, I don't know. So what I said, don't panic. Try to dig a sound out of this thing that is as near to Jimmy Smith as you can get, you know. So I tried that and came up with something, and then did the gig. And I thought, wow, this thing's got a lot of power. And I ended up, that was the deal, man. I ended up going and getting myself a Hammond, and there I was.
Not just you playing on your own, you've actually got your own outfit, right? But the Brian Auger Trio, and you're starting playing gigs under your own name, right, as well. You're in this kind of rather fevered environment in the early 60s. There's a lot of drugs around. Were you always quite sort of moderate? Did you partake in that stuff, or were you just focused on your music?
We would play back rooms of the pubs. Somebody would start a club, and of course people would get so incensed with the music. Oh mate, God, let me buy you a drink. I realized I could drink a lot, and it didn't bother me the next morning. I'd just get up and start, you know. But then all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, there's a day came when I was playing, and my mind said, play this, and my fingers said, no, we're not playing that. And so I went, what? And I realized that there was a line where I couldn't physically do what I wanted to do on, you know, because I was blotto just about. And so I just said, right, that's it. And when I don't want to drink any of this stuff, and I don't need it.
Same with the drugs. So did you just avoid all that stuff? Because it was almost been all around you in the clubs, right? People, it's early 60s, people doing speed and people smoking dope and stuff like. Did you just kind of like, I want to do my thing here?
That was more or less it, man. But I mean, I saw what that did. Phil Seaman, for example, the one I told you about, man. Later on at the Flamingo, Rick Gunnell came down and said to me, look, I've got, you know, Phil Seaman outside, and he's in terrible shape. I don't know how long he's going to be able to, you know, do anything. And he wants to sit in with you guys, and I want to bung him, you know, 25 or 30 quid to keep him going. And he said, what do you think, Brian? Could he sit in with you? I said, absolutely, you know. And he came. And it's funny, a lot of people that were that were taking maybe cocaine or one of those kind of drugs, you know, their time wasn't straight. You had to play with them. If that wasn't happening, nothing was happening as far as I was concerned. And so we did these things every week. Phil would turn up and play a couple of tunes with us, and it would be, you know, I'd be very sorry to see him and he would turn up with his snare drum in a brown paper bag and a pair of sticks. It had got to that level. And one night, he was Phil. again, and he played it. It was amazing. And when we went into the band room, he grabbed hold of me and he said, I dreamed of playing like that, you know? And I thought, oh my God. And he says, don't you ever take any of this shit. Don't play around with it or anything, man. He says, you know, and that was it. And he'd fallen down in the street between these things, man. And he had, you know, bruises and stuff.
Been this whole thing, hasn't there, particularly with jazz players and smack. Somehow it had become part of their thing, hadn't it? Even though in the end, you know, it kind of was killing them, right? Killing them, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but Miles at one point said to his dad, who had a little house out in the back in the garden, a kind of shed. And he said to his dad, listen, Dad, I'm going to go and live in the shed for a couple of months and don't send anybody down there. I don't want to deal with anybody. And got through it and came out the other side. You know, Coltrane was a pretty straight guy, actually. And also Wes Montgomery never touched any of that stuff. So there were people that were about that were tremendous. But Phil was... There it was. He was. I remember. I got this picture of him leaning against the wall, waiting to come on with us. You know, and he looked just scary. So it was a lesson. I'd started the band Trinity, which was just a trio, Hammond organ trio, and within about a couple of months, I was playing in Manchester, a place called the Twisted Wheel. Or everybody played there, you know. And it was also another one that was open until about 2:00 in the morning. And in the break, a guy comes up and he says, hi, I wonder whether you'd like to come and talk to my managers. I'm Long John Baldry. So he was like a household name. And so I said, sure, I'll come and, you know, talk to whoever you want. And they said, look, the Hoochie Coochie Men, and that was John's band, they're out of control. John can't stand it anymore. He can't control these boys, you know. He says, we're looking for somebody who could actually put a band together and make him come to rehearsals, you know, and make him get ready on time to get to the gigs. And I was pretty, you know, straight on about all that stuff. So I said, well, can I pick the band? And they said, yes. John wanted one of his pals. And I said, well, okay. It was Rod Stewart.
What?
Rod was like a guy that flitted around in the scene at that time, you know, and sat in with different people. He sat in with me. And I said, well, I'd just done some recording for a lady called Julie Driscoll, and she's got a hell of a voice. You know, she's working for my manager, answering Yardbird's fan mail, and she deserves a lot better than that, I can tell you, you know. So I said, what about if we add her? They said, well, how would that work? I said, well, the way it would work is I'd go on and I'd play a couple of Jimmy Smith things or whatever, and then Julie would come on and I would, you know, accompany her, singing whatever it was. She was totally into like Nina Simone and all sorts of people like Aretha Franklin. And then Rod could come on and Rod could do whatever the hell he liked, and we could both sing backup for Rod. And then Baldry would come on as the king star, and we would all be able to sing backup for him. You know, we'd be able to do some gospel stuff and, you know, whatever. And they thought about that for about half a minute. I said, well, yeah, well, we could take a shot at that. So I said to Balders, I said, what do you think then, John? And he said, that's okay with me, mate. The steam packet was launched.
Quite a lineup, yes. You know, you, John Baldry, Rod Stewart, Julie Driscoll. So this sort of brief burst of steam, run out of steam, as it were. And you and Julie then go on with a new bass player and form Trinity, right? And tell us about that.
The steam packet kind of fell apart at one point. We went out to Saint-Tropez to play during the summertime, and John tried to drink the whole of the wine harvest for the year. And so we had four times we were on during the night, and he didn't make it to the last two. We were on our own, and so there was Julie and there was my rhythm section, and so Trinity was, was that when went on from there. And Julie would bring stuff from like Donovan and and people like that, and say, well, I want to sing this, but can you do something, do your thing on it? And so I would think, oh man, I'd go home and try and figure out how to do it for us. And suddenly the Bob Dylan tapes appeared.
Basement tapes. Dylan's done very rough demos of a whole bunch of songs, which he's intending, or his publishers are intending, other people to do. So it gets sent round, doesn't it? It became a bootleg, and various people sort of pick tracks which they're going to do. And so by the time it got to you guys, there was just 2 tracks left, Wheels on Fire, and one more.
2 tracks left. And I think Manfred Mann got it first. And so, it was The Mighty Quinn was a big hit for him. Anyway, so, I had this thing, does your memory serve you well? And it goes along, and it's just him playing guitar and a bass player, and we listened to it. I said, well, I could make a great album track out of that, but I don't think that's a single. So I went home and I tried to arrange this damn thing, and it was funny because I tried putting rock beats to it and stuff, and it just didn't work at all. And then I thought, well, maybe it's too fast, and slowed it down, and because the lyrics were quite psychedelic, which was all the rage at the time, and in the end I said, well, I'm a jazz player, he's playing 4 in the bar, I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to maybe do this like a march. When we went in the studio, I put the track down kind of like that, added some strings and a solo, and Julie came in and did that amazing
and incredible.
Yeah. So when I listened to it, I went, well, boy, that's changed. I still thought that wasn't a single.
You were wrong.
Yes, completely.
Absolute massive hit, right?
If your memory serves you well, we were gonna meet again anyway. So I'm going to unpack all my things and sit before it gets too late. No man alive will come to you with another tale to tell, but you know that we shall meet again if your memory serves you well. Wheels on fire, rolling down the road.
Well, also, I mean, it was the right time, wasn't it? It was a melting pot when the Beatles, of course, mixing all sorts of sounds and all sorts of styles with recording techniques, cutting it all up together. So by this stage, you become also a session player, right, as well. So you're doing all the live circuits.
Yeah.
You're a sort of in-demand session player, and you've gone on to play with virtually everybody, right? So, but just tell us about your London life at the time. Where were you living? What were you? Where were you buying your clothes? What did you look like? You must have been by this stage the dude about town, right?
Well, I was living in Shepherd's Bush,
right? Still,
and I used to go up to the Chelsea Antique Market, and we'd go up there and scour through what they'd got, and everybody dressed out of that. If you look at the Beatles stuff, we used to see each other fairly regularly. I mean, Paul McCartney and Ringo used to come to this little club called Pink Elephant or something like that in Jermyn Street, and when we were playing. And then one day, one guy came up and said, "This guy's got a tremendous voice, man. He's just made a single, and he'd like to sit in with you." And I said, "Oh, here we go." I said, "Well, look, send him up here. Let me look at him." This guy comes up. I said, "Where you from, mate?" He said, "Oh, I'm from Wales." I said, "What are you doing over there?" He says, "Well, I've been working in the working men's clubs at the Miners, their club, He says, "But I just made this single, if that doesn't go," he says, I'm going back to Wales, and he seemed to be a really nice guy. I just said, "What do you want to sing?" And he says, "Do you know Lucy?" "Yeah, I think so, so I we look, and he opens his mouth, man, and we all went, oh no, what?" And it was, "And what's your name, mate?" And I was like, "Tom Jones." 2 weeks later, man, bang, there was number one.
Was that the Green Grass of Home, was it?
Yeah, and so he had a TV show and he booked us.
Right.
And when we arrived, he had a handful of like champagne flutes and a bottle of champagne, and he said, "Hello, Brian." And I said, "Hello, Tom. I see you never went back to the miners clubs then,
Do you still see him?
Yeah.
Good. Tell us about Hendrix. You sort of narrowly avoided being in a band with him, right?
I was called by Chaz Chandler, who was the bass player for the Animals, but he'd gone into management with a guy called Mike Jeffrey, who I considered to be the greatest crook on the London scene, So I didn't want anything to do with him. But Chaz said, "Please come up and talk to us," So I said, okay. I went up and sat there, and he said, "We've brought this amazing guitar player from New York." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "We want him to front your band." I said, "Well, that's very nice of you, but I actually have a guitar player, and also Julie Driscoll fronts my band." Jeffrey is sitting there with dark glasses on, and I said to Chaz, "On Thursday, we're playing at a club called the Cromwellian in Cromwell Road." That was another one where you could drink late, and everybody who's who was there, So I said, if you want to bring him along, he can sit in with the band, and it'll be like a kind of showcase for it in front of everybody. So Thursday comes up, and I'm introduced to Jimi. I don't know anything about his background or anything. Seemed like a really nice guy. And I said, "What do you want to play, man?" I says, "Can you play this chord sequence?" And he plays the chord sequence for me. And it was for Hey Joe. I didn't know Hey Joe until later. "Yeah, that sounds good. Why don't you count us in then?" Eric Clapton was in the audience, Jeff Beck. I mean, loads of guitar players. And Jimi started to play, did the whole number with the thing behind his back and playing with his teeth in the middle of it all. It was like ridiculous. Clapton and our bevy of guitar players, they were pretty hot at the time. They were really good players, but they weren't quite themselves yet. Because we're all listening to American music.
So they must have been a bit intimidated.
Clapton apparently went home and said, "Well, that's it, isn't it? Back to the drawing board." As far as Jimi was concerned, I never heard anybody like that. It was something really new for me in guitar playing, and
When did you last see him? Moth to the flame, wasn't he? He burnt out so quickly. But he was around in London for quite a bit, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, Jimmy would come around and find out where we were playing and come and sit in with us, you know. And Julie and I had a number one in France, and we were going to play in Paris at a place, it was a theatre. And I stood in the wings because Jimmy was opening for us, being unknown, you know. So I watched that and I thought, wow, this guy is like incredible. You know, this guy's going to be a big star. And I think about 18 months afterwards, I opened for him at the same place. Yeah, I know, it was amazing. And then I didn't see him for, I don't know, a couple of years. And when the next time I saw him, I'd got a call from John McLaughlin. I was in New York, and John said, "Listen, I'm mixing my new album, and I'm sure you'll like it. Do you want to come to the studio?" I said, "Sure." So I went along to the studio. When I heard the first track, it was Dragon Song, and I went, "Oh, God, I've got to play that," you know. And then the door opened and in came Jimmy with his girlfriend. They looked terrible.
Right.
You know, and also Mike Jeffrey and his engineer treated Jimmy like, you know, in a really horrible way, you know, like, "You're done. This is the new guy," you know. Well, like that. And so, you know, I said to Jimmy, "Hey, can't we go outside and talk?" So we went outside the studio, and when I saw him in the light, I mean, his flesh was like grey. So he said, "Could you stay and make an album with me?" And I said, "Well, Jim, I'd love to do that, but," I said, I'm terribly sorry, but I can't just drop everything." How long would it take you to do it? Because I was used to making albums in like 2 days, you know. And he said, "About 3 months." You know, but anyway, he invited me to have a look at his studio the next morning, and at that meeting, outside the studio, he pulled out this silver paper with brown stuff on it, and he was about to take a sniff of it, and he offered it to. "Oh, I'm sorry, bro. Here you are, man." And I said, "Wait a minute. This is what I never forget." You know, I said to him, "Jim, you got to stop taking that stuff, man, because if you don't, it's going to kill you in the end, you know." And he said, "Well, I need a lot more people around me like you." Within about 6 months or so, he was gone. I just thought to myself, well, that is really sad.
Yeah.
The amount of music that we could have made, he could have kind of like inspired people to play with anybody. What a shame, man. A great artist.
A great artist. To go back to you and Julie, you were quite revolutionary as well, you know, at the time, weren't you? Because you were mixing jazz and R&B, which you'd been at, and then she was bringing in the rock and folk as well, right? So you had this kind of psychedelic fusion thing going on. You had this huge hit as well when you're in the States and stuff. So what happened?
Well, basically, man, you know, dodging between Ronnie Scott's, where I'm playing straight ahead jazz, and then going over to the Flamingo and mixing with all our friends over there. What I wanted to do is to make a bridge, if possible, between the jazz and the rock worlds, because I realized that there were amazing ideas happening in the jazz side that could be filtered down to help the people in you know, in the other sides to develop. I don't know, but that was it was part of the bridge. So that and to say that, hey, you know, music's music. And if it's good, it's good. And if it isn't good, throw it away. That was basically what it was all about, you know. And I was heading that way. And the reason we had the first hits, but what happened was the record company would lean on you to do the same thing again. They could, you know, and I didn't want to do that because I thought, Well, I mean, that's the death of the art in whatever we're doing. And so I started the Oblivion Express, and it came, the name came because I thought to myself, well, now you're going to wade against the commercial tide, and it may be your quickest way to oblivion.
That wasn't quite what happened, though, was it?
No, it wasn't. No.
I mean, and Julie obviously got so fed up with the whole thing that she sort of disappeared for a while, didn't she? But Oblivion Express, you form it. That thing that we talked about is this kind of spirit, the spirit of music, the muse that's been moving you all this time. I mean, you really sort of let go into it then, didn't you? And you've made all these albums, you've toured, you've collaborated with loads of people. You got together with Julie again, you played with Eric Burdon again, you know, you've just kept going, right, all the way through the 70s and the 80s, even when, as you've said, you know, like, you know, organ-based jazz and R&B went out of fashion for some time, right. But then, you know, in the 90s, and you're hailed as the godfather of acid jazz, right?
I was looking on that as, I'm not only kind of learning lessons out of the business side of the of music, but I'm pushing ahead with my own kind of playing and writing stuff that is off the wall, and you know, managing to get away with it.
Thousands of gigs, you know, lots of collaborations and records. You've also been sampled a lot, right? You know, by hip hop artists. You know, you settled in the States. Your wife's Italian, and what I love about your story as well is there's that family. Right from the beginning, you know, we're talking about your early days in Shepherd's Bush. Family's been really important. You know, you toured Karma on drums, your daughter's singing for you. That whole family thing has been a really important part of your life too, hasn't it?
Absolutely, because I realised that I'd learned so much touring and being you know, in the music itself, that that would be lessons for all of them, you know, and. I heard...
We've got to this point, You've got this new archival series, Auger Incorporated. It's this epic collection of your stuff over 5 decades, isn't it? That's going to be released by K7 and Soul Bank Music, and that must be quite a good feeling to have it all collected together. And Brian, we're coming to the end, and I wanted to say thank you so much. It's amazing to hear your stories, and also to hear how much music has moved you. When you think back, you know, at the age of 82, all the way to those early years at Shepherd's Bush, is it possible for you to kind of like sum it up? I mean, these wonderful signposts along the way.
Music is one of those things, man. It's like taking a candle in the dark, and the more you put it around, the more you realise how big the dark is. Right. And so I never get to the end of it.
Keep burning your candle, Brian. Thanks a lot, man.
You know, it's my pleasure, Stephen, and I hope we get to talk together again.
Wow, I hope so too, I really do. Brian he's lovely, you can tell from that, and this archival series, Auger Incorporated, you know, massive vinyl CD set covering his extraordinary career with loads of just great groovy cool stuff on it. That's released by Soul Bank Music on IK7. Thanks very much to Greg Boroman. Greg takes care of Brian and his music related stuff, and he introduced us, and also to Karma Auger, who is Brian's son and drummer, who facilitated this. Thanks, of course, to Soho Radio and to you guys. People have been writing in with suggestions, as I mentioned before. Chris, thank you very much for your latest about Ladbroke Grove. Absolutely. James Younger, Nigel Spencer, John Sinclair, of course, Ronnie, as ever. Anybody else who's been pinging in with thoughts and suggestions, we really appreciate that. And, of course, we will be back next time with more stories from the counterculture, from the underground, from the other side. In the meantime, I thought we'd finish with another tune by Brian. This is Walking, featuring Jimmy Page, probably heard of him, Joe Harriott, and of course Sonny Boy Williams. See you later.
We're gonna walk a wild child a while. I wanna walk a while with you. There's something I want you to do, baby. I'm gonna explain, 'cause I don't want my love to be in vain. Time, we walk one more time, I might be able to change your mind. Walk with me, baby. Walk with me, child. I won't explain, 'cause I don't want my love to be in vain. Walk with me, baby. Keep on walking. Walk on with me, mama, and walk with me just one more time. Walk with me, baby. I like that walk, I like that talk, mama, let's keep on walking. God knows you know I like the way you walk, baby. You got a cute little walk, you got a cute little walk, you got a cute little walk, but walk on, baby.